I was a big fan of David Allen's Getting Things Done. And I thought, wow, that's going to make me more productive. And it did. It did make me more productive until I hit the wall again. I just loaded up the backlog with more stuff. And then I was just as stressed out as I was before. And then I realized, well, it's probably more important that I decide what I really want to do. What is it I'm really after? And then you're faced with the realities of life, and sometimes you can't do what you want to do, and you got to dance around with that. You've got things that must be done that may not be so much fun, and then you make room for the things that really mean something to you. And it's a difficult dance, but the moment when you realize you gotta make finitude your partner is liberating.
Welcome to Season 2 of Clearing Obstacles, the podcast for leaders and those that want to be, because no organization, not even yours, can thrive without effective leadership. Now, as you master this skill, it will become the superpower that gains the love and respect of your team, the freedom you seek in your life and business, and ultimately, the success of your vision. I'm your host and coach, Dan Kent, with Best Self Coaching, and in Season 2, we're bringing you the voices of thought leaders who have a unique and valuable perspective to share on how to reimagine and redefine leadership in our world today. We'll be diving into topics of vision and authority and accountability, management, culture, vulnerability, self-awareness, and much more, because they all fall on the shoulders of today's leaders. Are you one of those exceptional people? Well, you can be. Our guests all have extensive theoretical and philosophical depth that's also matched by their experience in the practical application of those principles. And we think you're going to agree. So, all of you emerging and evolving leaders, buckle up as we clear the obstacles to help you get there from here. Goal setting, project management, delegation, and accountability. OKRs, KPIs, and ODMs. All right, look, if you're holding back an urge to vomit or leave this episode, you're not alone, but please don't. The mechanics of leading an organization and managing it at the same time can be daunting at best and demoralizing at worst, but it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, it shouldn't be that way for any of us, even the high performers for whom those disciplines come naturally. Now, over the years, I've had a number of clients who struggle with ADHD, and especially the less clinical shiny object syndrome. Those challenges might resonate with you because, in fact, some data actually supports that as many as 30% of entrepreneurs have ADHD specifically, compared to only about 5% of the general population. Now, those are staggering numbers on the one hand, but not as surprising as you'd think when you've been working with them for almost 15 years as I have. And a few months ago, one of those clients introduced me to a project management tool, which is far more than that, but one that finally makes sense to him, called Goalscape. Now, we'll be telling you more about this phenomenal tool and the approach behind its design, but I'm just too excited to first introduce the co-designer and creator of Goalscape, Marcus Baur. Now, goal setting and human motivation, transparency, effective leadership, existential angst, and elegant design. These were all rather unexpected topics that Marcus and I discussed a few months ago for over an hour when he graciously agreed to talk with me about Goalscape. To be honest, I expected a 15-minute pitch from the founder and CEO of this company, but instead, in our conversation, I found a true thought leader and inspiration in the way this man's mind, heart, and soul are all embedded in his work and his worldview. We need more leaders like him, and I knew I had to get him on the Clearing Obstacles podcast. And with that little context, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Marcus Baur. Marcus, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dan. Very nice introduction. I enjoyed it.
Terrific. Good. You're worthy of every bit of it. I really appreciated our conversation a few months ago, and I've really been looking forward to this ever since.
So have I.
Let's just start off here. Can you maybe share a little bit about your impressive and pretty diverse background, and ultimately how that all coalesced to inspire the development of Goalscape?
Yeah, right. I just cracked half a century. I'm 53 years old and was born in northern Germany and grew up near the coast. And so I, through a friend, ended up becoming a sailor. And through my education, my other passion became architecture. I was pretty sure early on as a kid that I wanted to become an architect. So I studied architecture, and I wasn't quite happy with the way, we build in our time. So I went into our library and I was digging through alternatives. And I found really interesting alternatives, which we spoke about briefly in the build up to the show.
Yeah.
It was actually a professor in San Francisco, and that's a story on its own. But what disappointed me about the studies was the state of our contemporary architecture. And I wanted to do something that was at the pulse of human evolution, if you like. And I knew I wouldn't become a heart surgeon. So I was asking myself, what could I do really well in this world, just to go deep into the subject. And I was a sailor, and the Olympics in Sydney were chosen as the venue for the Olympics 2000. And that grabbed me. I was thinking, I'm not that good a sailor, but could I be maybe, could I set myself the goal of going to the Olympics? And I set that goal for me. I got really lucky with my team partner that I chose, and we eventually ended up at the Olympics. So I became a professional sailor. I still finished my architectural degree. And then, I started a family, and that rejigged all the goal setting and all the priorities. And I ended up in software development, which was interesting. Worked a lot with the German software company SAP, more than a decade. We built lots of interesting software development projects. And I took over from my sailing years and from the architectural background that Goalscape concept, which is, a way of managing, which is slightly different from a classic project management approach. And it had influences from the architectural thinking that I followed and the sort of Olympic sports approach built into it. But it was a side project because, I had a family to feed. And I was working with SAP, one of the biggest software companies in the world, and that was great. I traveled all over the world running those software development projects and promoting what we had built. And Goalscape was a little side project. And only when the pandemic hit, I was effectively at the point where I thought, wait a minute, do I want to do this for real, or do I close it down? And I decided to go for it. And so in the past 3 years, I've been working hard on Goalscape, and we developed a new version. And that's the focus of my life at the moment.
Terrific. What a journey and divert. I mean, who else has on their CV Olympic sailing competitor, architect, and software developer designer?
I'm not a software developer. I've worked
fair enough.
Developing software, more of a manager, I would say, a product owner. I wish I could develop software myself. I can't, and that's been part of the journey as well. I was, and there many interesting learnings in that. But I understand software development and how it is different from architectural development, and what architectural development can actually learn from software development. These are interesting topics as well.
Yeah. And we don't need to get right into this rabbit hole, but that's one of the things with leadership. You have to have probably enough functional knowledge of the product or service that your company is delivering. But real leadership, I don't think requires an intimate knowledge of the actual fundamentals of the trade itself, right? Your job is to know what the vision of that end product is. Steve Jobs could only write code so well. He hired other designers, software developers, software architects, and people that worked in plastics and glass and experts in those things. He didn't have that ability. He's maybe
but he got really lucky with meeting Steve Wozniak.
Oh yeah.
Really good at that. And Steve is someone who's known to say, I love to work at the bottom of the org chart, and that was a lucky combination. And I think at the heart of successful companies, you often have that lucky combination. Like I got lucky with my sailing partner for the Sydney Olympics. That was a really lucky combination.
Yeah.
And the founder of Skype, I sometimes quote, who said he was really lucky with the two developers he got together with to build Skype.
Yeah.
And then he sold it to Microsoft and they messed it up. And then he bought it back. And then he sold it to them again, both times made millions. We sometimes sail by his little island in Sweden. He has this really beautiful little island. It's called Rose Island. And I always think of Skype when I see that. But, it's important that you form a team that covers your weaknesses, your deficiencies. And when you have that lucky situation, That's great. But examples like Mark Zuckerberg, for example, he was a developer. He could code and he
Sure.
immediately could make very sound judgments on the people he would work together with. That is a great asset to have. I think if Steve Jobs wouldn't have been so lucky in the first years,
Mm-hmm.
he wouldn't have taken off like that. He was lucky that Apple One was built so well by Wozniak, and that he was so good at marketing. That was the golden combination.
Those were, I'll even backtrack a little bit on that. He's not necessarily held up as someone who exemplifies our ideal model of a leader. He could inspire. He was phenomenal at marketing and inspiring people, but working for him was legendary in its challenges that I think people had. So he's not necessarily the prime example to hold up with that, other than to discuss the point of, you don't have to be the expert in creating the product or service that your company actually
no, you don't.
In the world.
I think strength of vision was something that really was such a strong mark on Steve Jobs, and the ability to focus, radically focus. I don't have that for sure. Yeah, my interests are a million miles wide, and hence sometimes only an inch deep. That's why the sailing was so interesting for me, because there I decided to go really, really deep, into every little detail. And Steve Jobs apparently could do that on the products he was after. He had a very strong product vision, and this human aspects came not second. They came fourth or fifth rank, but he got to the product that nobody else would get to.
Agreed, especially through branding and messaging. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Goalscape. There's going to be a link in the show notes, of course, to get to Goalscape. It's just goalscape.com, proper normal expected spelling there, but there are links in the show notes as well. Marcus, will you just kind of walk us through a little bit about the product? What in your sailing experience, because I think that's sort of where this was born, between this synergy between the architecture and your goals relative to sailing. That's kind of where this thing was birthed.
Yeah. The concept is super simple. It's about respecting the fact that that our lives are bounded. And it's so obvious if you're trying out for the Olympics, because you've got 5 years, 10 years, depends on how early you decide to really go for it. And you won't move that event. It's not like building an airport where, eventually they say, oh, we got to postpone opening this airport by 3 years. In Germany, that was a running joke. The airport in Berlin was postponed by 10 years, maybe. You can't do that for the Olympics. You got that definite deadline. And that's really interesting situation to have. And if you're motivated like we were, and most Olympic athletes are keen, obviously, to perform at the Olympics, then you ask yourself the question, well, how in this finite space of time I have, how do I make the best of that? And that was the challenge I was facing. And we drew up these mind maps to come to grips with all the things we had to do. We tried some reverse engineering, sort of from the perfect sailing day at the Olympics. How does that reflect into the morning before the race? How does that reflect into the preparation for the regatta? And how does it reflect into the year beforehand? And you come up with this huge network of things, typical mind map kind of stuff, and everything is interconnected. But in the end, you got to decide what you do now. Right. Yep. So I thought somehow I need to come to grips with the big picture, with everything we need to do, but I need to boil it back down onto something where I can make a call of what do we do now and what do we do next. And the mental image I came up with was a circle, because that's the finite space. And it was a layered circle, so sort of a donut shape, where initially I only plotted the 20 or so maneuvers that we needed to learn better than anybody else, where we wanted to be world class. So if you want to sail a boat around a race course, you can break down the maneuvers into some finite numbers, something like 20, maybe 25, depends on, there's, sub maneuvers, if you like. If you do a tack that's, tacking against the wind, you can do that in 5 different ways, maybe, but still there's a finite number.
Pretty finite.
doing all these maneuvers, I plotted them into a circle, and we wanted to be really good at all of them. But then you realize, okay, some maneuvers are more important than others when it comes to getting around the race course quick. Some maneuvers you can maybe do in a very simple way where, we're going to do that safely. And there's probably going to be someone who's going to have a little edge when he does that maneuver. He's going to gain a little bit, but that's in a part of the race that it's not so important. So the advantage in a donut shape is if you have got your slices there, you can adjust the size and you can make some more important than the others.
Right.
And initially we did that with pen and paper. We just drew it up. And it has a very different quality compared to a list because you get that sense of wholeness. You get the sense of the question, is everything I need to do in here? And if it is, how do I prioritize it?
Right. Relative importance.
Once you have that big picture, you can mark your progress in it really easily. It was sort of like a dartboard we had where we had certain milestones towards the middle. Actually, initially, it was the other way around. It was from the inside out. Later on, now the Goalscape concept works from the outside in. You've got your goal in the middle. So in this case, it would be the best at handling that Olympic type of boat. And then you mark your progress in each of the slices. And of course, you need an idea of what does progress mean. In our case, with the maneuvers, there were 3 distinct milestones. The first one was we understand the maneuver. We've written it down. We've discussed it with our coach. There is a fundamental understanding and agreement of how we want to do it. But that doesn't mean you're good at doing it, right? That's milestone number 2. You practice and practice and practice in the different wind ranges. And then you're good at doing it 9 out of 10 times, which is great. But now you're not under stress. You're in a training environment. So milestone number 3 is we can even do this under stress. It's like riding a bike. It's like walking. It became second nature. We can do it. And it's not only feels like perfect flow, it triggers perfect flow because it's become so natural.
Right.
And that's a high goal, right? And you realize we're probably not going to get there in every little maneuver. So where's the big ones? Where's the ones we want to tackle first? And that then gave me a sense of control over the whole challenge. And that's how the Goalscape concept was born.
Yeah. And anybody listening to this, it would be a good opportunity to go, if you can do it at the same time, going to goalscape.com. Here, this is the difficulty in having an audio only podcast is we can't work with the visuals. And that's part of what is so compelling and frankly so powerful about the Goalscape tool is the visual element. It's why it finally made sense to that client of mine who, we were working with a number of different paradigms around project management, and it couldn't sink in. We could go through lists, Asana, Monday.com, Trello boards, Todoist, outline format, OKR pyramids. Every kind of design and visual representation of project management. It wouldn't resonate with him. It couldn't keep his attention. It didn't sink in. And in order to do the work that needed to be done and see it all at the same time, see all of the work all at the same time. And Goalscape offers that. It allows you this ability to see that, center of the donut, high audacious goal that you have, and then break it down into however many steps, I suppose, objectives. If we're going to use that OKR example, how many objectives are needed to achieve that goal? And then what are the key results to achieve each of those objectives? It kind of follows that traditional project management paradigm, but it's represented visually in such a way that, again, you can see all of it at once. You can assign context to it. You can assign delegated responsibility to it. You can assign timelines to it. You can attach other supporting documents for each of the goals or sub-goals. All of this is contained in this one concentric circle structure. How many layers deep can you go on those circles? I haven't actually tested the software to that degree. How many layers deep can you go?
Theoretically, you could do 100 or more. I don't think we have put a limit on it. I have to try how far I can blow it up. And Well, maybe we're giving people the wrong idea. Don't blow up our servers.
That's not what we're looking for here. And it would be, I think you'd get diminishing returns of value, the more complicated you make it that way. I was just curious because it is so powerful.
Well, the real question is how much breakdown makes sense,
Right.
and how many goals make sense as well.
Exactly.
On a personal level, you only need one goal at a time. And I mean that literally on a daily basis. If you stop planning and you start doing, it's good to focus on one goal at a time. That's why what we call now and next. You want to know which goal is now, and when you're done with that, you want to know which are you going to do next.
Agreed.
And that should be a flexible process. But if you break down a big challenge because you have a long-term goal, then I don't like to be tied to a specific number of levels of abstraction, because you abstract as you go. And abstraction is very important.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a huge problem in the business world that there's too much abstraction. And the reason, that's my theory, I don't know if it's true, but I was surprised when I got into the business world that I found such low levels of motivation and engagement, which is sort of scientifically proven that that is a problem, bigger problem in Europe than in the US, but it's not so different. In sports, you have these high level of engagement, despite the fact that you're doing something that's a little bit meaningless, whereas in business, you're creating products and services that serve people. There's actually apparently more meaning in it. But I think the abstraction that is implemented in business environments is a huge problem. So too many levels lead to too much abstraction. That's why I would say less levels is usually better. If you have a business goalscape, I'd like to see the products and services very early on the first level, not departments, not some abstract initiatives, but what are the products and services people are working on? I like that concreteness because that's what you get in the sporting goalscape, right? You have, by the way, the maneuvers, that's how it started. Then I realized, I can use this to plan my logistics. I can use this to plan my fitness. I can use this to plan my private life. And then you realize, okay, what are all the things that I want to get into this? And you soon realize this is too much, and then you start to focus. Then you'd start to boil things down again. On the other hand, you don't want to forget really important stuff. So you start this dance of what makes it into the circle, what's in and what's out, because making the decision not to do something is just as important as making the decision to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And Goalscape reminds you of that. It reminds us of an ugly truth about our life, that it's bounded, that it's not limitless. I love the book by Oliver Berkman, 4,000 Weeks.
4,000 Weeks, yeah.
Yeah, Productivity for Mortals, or I think it's called. And it's a reminder of that. And some people don't like to be reminded of that. It's better to pretend that we can fly to the moon and we can fly to Mars and it's all not a problem. But we get thrown back to the fact eventually that the Olympics are going to be on that date. And our life is limited and you can't have it all. So how do you make the best out of the available time and out of the available resources you have? Goalscape reminds you of that. And then it's a very agile process of creating a structure that is fit for purpose. And it's an art. It's not easy, to create that structure and to abstract wisely without burying the meaning, but at the same time having a structure that is manageable and controllable because you've got all the elements sorted into a tree-like structure.
Right. You mentioned that Oliver Berkman book, 4,000 Weeks, and I would juxtapose that too with Greg McKeown's Essentialism, which advocates basically saying no. Right? Because every time you say yes to something, to anything, a decision, what you're going to do today, you are effectively saying no to everything else, right? And carving out what those priorities are is critical. It's funny to juxtapose those two books and hold them up together because they're in some ways very similar in their philosophy about finitude, about how much time we actually have and the constraints of time, but also very different about in terms of their regard for how we view productivity. And Oliver Berkman's to way oversimplify it, sort of advocates almost I don't want to call it a resignation, but a surrender maybe to the finitude of life. And you've only got so much available to you. You know, we've talked about in previous episodes about a time budget, right? We have 168 hours available to us every week. That includes our time for sleep, for hygiene, for feeding ourselves. You have 168 hours a week. That's it. How are you going to spend what's left after you've taken care of all of those personal human needs that you have? And maybe I hope spent time with your family and maybe gotten some exercise in and taking care of yourself. And when you're now down to maybe 100 hours a week left, maybe, where are you going to spend that time? And if you're not precisely clear on where that's going to be and you're not proactively planning that, you're pissing it away, right? It's too precious and too finite to not reconcile that. Like you said, we don't always like to, at least the people I work with, and myself included, we don't like to reconcile that reality. That
No, it reminds us of the end of life.
Our immortality, right? We can get all existential here.
It doesn't, it's not a popular topic.
Mm-hmm.
But Bergman argues for surrendering and accepting that, because he argues, as far as I understood it, that opens the door to a more inspired way of doing what we're doing. I was a big fan of David Allen's Getting Things Done, and I thought, wow, that's going to make me more productive. And it did. It did make me more productive until I hit the wall again. I just loaded up the backlog with more stuff, and then I was just as stressed out as I was before. And then I realized, well, it's probably more important that I decide what I really want to do. What is it I'm really after? And then you're faced with the realities of life, and sometimes you can't do what you want to do.
Yeah.
And you got to dance around with that. You've got things that must be done that may not be so much fun. And then you make room for the things that really mean something to you. And it's a difficult dance, but the moment when you realize you gotta make finitude your partner is liberating. It's very liberating.
Couldn't agree more.
You accept that there's not going to be the magic bullet that's gonna solve everything. You gotta, I wouldn't call it grind on. That sounds very uninspired, but you gotta open the door for evolution to happen in your life. And you don't have it all under control, but you can give yourself direction all the time. And we think of the process of creating and maintaining a goalscape a little bit of like drawing a map, mm-hmm. and then using that map as a compass at the same time. And that constantly evolves and cycles through, where the map changes and then the direction changes. So it's a continuous process, and being too rigid about it just doesn't work. Life is against that, and it's changing too much. And that's something I explored recently together with a professor for business philosophy, if you like, from Vienna.
Uh-huh.
And we wrote an article about it on what does strategy and tactics mean in a world of radical change. Maybe a topic to touch on, if you like.
Is that on the blog on Goalscape?
No. We just drafted the English version. It was published in a German magazine, and we just the English version. We're going to put it up on our website in the coming days or weeks.
Terrific. I look forward to seeing that. For all listeners, when you go to goalscape.com, typical navigation of the product and about us and all of that, there's also a blog section with some very, very thoughtful articles. This is what I found so compelling about our last conversation, why I was so looking forward to this one, Marcus, was your approach to all of these concepts have all been woven into the product at Goalscape. And I think that comes through the culture that you've obviously developed there, the vision that you carry forward, and how you're communicating all of that. And this was, if I listed out a bullet list of all of the topics we spoke about in such a condensed and dense conversation last time we talked a few months ago, part of that was We talked about transparency with your organization, everybody being able to see what the goals are, have the context for them, see the big picture, be able to zoom in, zoom out as needed, and say a little bit about the transparency piece and how I think that contributes. And I think you kind of agreed, especially based on your blogs and the design of this product, how transparency of the vision, of the goals, and the tactics to get there, as well as you said, like the kind of those ancillary, more contextual elements also fit into how a team operates and operates functionally, I guess.
Yeah, let's talk about transparency. And it's good to contrast the business world with the sporting world here. Obviously, in sports, things are super transparent. Usually there's cheating going on. And, 5 years later, you find out that the majority of the athletes were doped, like in cycling, for example. But the actual battle happening on the battlefield is very transparent. Everybody can see it. And every competition is a checkup where you get a reality check. How are people doing? That's why people love to watch it, I think, because it's so raw and true and real. And in the business world, there's, as I said, so many levels of abstraction and often a lack of transparency.
Yeah.
Why are things happening this way? There's all sorts of hidden agendas and office politics, and there's an official set of goals. But as Peter Senge stated already in the 90s, there is an invisible set of conflicting goals that influence everything that's happening. And that's a problem. There's this really interesting study by, I think it was MIT, Sloan School of Economics, that reversed engineered what are teams doing that have great KPIs.
Okay.
Came up with a really simple acronym that I like better than the SMART goal setting acronym, which is so theoretical and nobody is doing it like that really every day. And their acronym was, those teams were fast, but not fast in the sense of quick. They were fast. The acronym stood for, they frequently discussed their goals. The goals were rather ambitious, not crazy ambitious, but rather ambitious. They were specific, and that's the S, and then they were transparent. The members understood what other team members were doing, and that leads to a natural empathy, and it also leads to an increased probability that people help each other. And that makes up successful teams. Those four things. And transparency with regards to goal setting, you don't have that if you do annual one-on-one goal setting meetings with the boss, because, you come up with a paper and maybe there's a bonus scheme attached to it, which is already toxic. And then that lands in a drawer and the rest of the team doesn't see it.
Right.
Whereas if you have a public goal structure that evolves, and I think Google is famous for, making their goals and their OKRs public to the whole organization.
Right.
Then you increase that sense of transparency and ideally also a culture of helping each other, which you can foster in interesting ways, by the way. Maybe we can touch on it. But I think if you have a map of your goals, the likelihood of them being transparent is increased. And that's what we built Goalscape to be, really. It's a landscape and a map of goals that people can look at and discuss and share and tag and color. And you can use it for every way you do weekly, bi-weekly checkups. You can use it along the way. And you start understanding what other people do, which I think is critical for successful teams.
Agreed. I'm not certain, full transparency here, whether your episode, this one here, is going to come before or after, but I'll be also speaking with Gustavo Rossetti at Fearless Culture, an organization that is here in the States. And he has what he calls his culture design canvas. And I'm so inspired by the overlap of what he has included on that culture design canvas. Look, here's the thing with culture. It's there whether it's intentional or not, right? It's just like I work with business owners all the time who say they need systems for their business. And what I have to very, kind of compassionately explain to them is there are already systems in your business. They may be like, hey, whenever the boss is around, act like you're busy or he's going to give you more work. That's a system, right? It's dysfunctional as hell, but it's a system. Just like with culture, there's already culture that's present. The question is it useful, productive, compassionate, thoughtful? Does it help move your business towards your vision, or is it a culture that's counterproductive and opaque and doesn't allow people to contribute or feel that they're safe to share? And all of those elements that he has on the culture design canvas, which I fiercely advocate for, it's a brilliant tool, all have ways of accessing the vision for the company and the work that needs to be done for us to get to our desired outcome. They're all kind of woven into the design and layout of a Goalscape project board. You touched on something earlier about kind of using Goalscape in different contexts. And I want to echo that and emphasize that I personally have 3 different Goalscape boards for myself. I have a personal one, I have a business one, and I have one where it's all included. And I could sort of conflate all of those into a single one, but then that one singular vision of Dan's life, as it were, gets too complicated. There's too much there, and I'd be scraping stuff off anyway because that's not where I want to spend the next, hopefully, 50 years of my life, if I'm fortunate enough to have that many. And the ability to use Goalscape in multiple contexts, like you said, sports in your case and all of the different maneuvers, business, those can be by department, they can be the overall vision of the company, it can be a 10-year goal. Personally, they can be all the different elements of your life that are important to you, maybe physical health, mental health, your professional life, your family, whatever might be involved in the ideal vision of your personal life. But I love how these same concepts apply in so many different contexts. And like I said before, you can zoom in and zoom out so easily and navigate all the different layers of the logistics as well as the abstraction. So you can get into the technical of it as well as the abstract and the more esoteric of each of those different layers.
Yeah, maybe we should explain that if you double click on any goal, it becomes the central goal. So you can focus, and that becomes a world of its own. And then you look at that goal in the context of the resources that are available to achieve that goal. And if you find that there's not enough resources available to achieve that goal, may it be money, time, know-how, people, passion, even as a resource, because people don't care. If you got a goal in the center and people can't tell you what pain achieving that goal alleviates or what gain is being created for them or others to achieve that goal, they're not going to do anything about it.
Of course not. Well, no inspiration.
Then get rid of it. So you can always focus in. I like the idea of having one Goalscape, but technically it's not that easy at the moment to just take one goal and implant it somewhere else. Eventually we will get there. And probably for me, it will increase the likelihood that I'll compile a Goalscape of my own. And of course, that means that you have some goals that you share with others. That's, the boat you're sailing on with these people, and that has its own direction. But since it's part of your life, why shouldn't it sit in there?
Why shouldn't it sit in there?
People won't see your personal goals, of course, what moves you. But I like to think of it in this integrated way because as a person, you're a whole, right? You're this one entity, and the things you do are can be embodied in that one map, and you can see how it touches other people and other organizations. And if you're not on board, the phenomenon of quiet quitting, then you've got this lame goal in there, and eventually it's going to fall apart. Other people are going to realize that your heart is not in that, and then that goal is going to die out of your Goalscape eventually anyway. The question is, how long can you keep up the terrain?
How long can you keep up the charade of its importance, of its impact, of its inspiration? Oh man, a goal's never going to be achieved if the participants, the stakeholders in that goal, aren't inspired by it. Can you say a little bit about maybe even your philosophy about that, and then tactically how that plays out in Goalscape?
Yeah, I, a lot to say about that, really. I mean, first off, my experience is counterintuitive to what most people think about sports and business. I found highly motivated people in the world of sports, and we tend to think, well, yeah, that's where motivated people end up. But I also found that when people, and I was a sailor, and you can sail for quite a long time. So there's sailors who do that, all their life.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that the motivation eventually wanes and becomes lower because you suffer from a certain degree of meaninglessness.
Mm-hmm.
What you're doing there is joyful, it's beautiful, it's a game, it's playful, but it doesn't help the world to get better in any way. You're not helping other people. I mean, if you're a dancer, maybe, or a football player, there's fans and you make the fans happy, but there's no deeper meaning in what you're doing. You're just playing a game. And then I thought, as I shift to the business world, I'll find the opposite. Highly motivated people, because as I mentioned before, they produce products and services that help other people. But that didn't materialize there. I found much lower levels of motivation. And that was really a conundrum to me, and I couldn't make sense of it. And I think part of it is that abstraction that I touched on, but another part is that the goal setting follows a really ancient model. And I call that the pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a top-down model where, as Marcus Buckingham, who I find interesting as an author, I think his last book was called Love and Work, where he goes into the question, how can you do something that inspires you? How can you, as a leader, propose something, if you like, that inspires your people? He talks about how goals can just rain down on people, and that doesn't create any sort of passion. That is so different from, I decide I want to go to the Olympics. It's from within me. It was born in me, and that inner drive is there. It's
Inherently intrinsic
goal, very intrinsic goal, and I love to reap the extrinsic benefits that it may bring.
Sure,
but it comes from me. So the goals are not raining down on me. It's coming from my inside. So how can you create that in any environment? Well, there's no easy fix for it, I'm sure, but it's the key to better business, I believe. And there is a quote by Buckminster Fuller, who was an architect in the last century. Don't really like his architecture so much, but what he said is so enlightening, in my opinion. He said, the moment people do what they really want to do, it's a different kind of life. That's such a simple realization, and it's so powerful. So while it's realizing that you can't always do what you love, and you can't only do what's fun, there's no world like that.
Right.
The more we do it, the more likely we are to do good work. So how do you do that in this pyramid where the goals rain down on you from up above? It just doesn't work. And that's why since 20 years, 30 years, people talk about, well, we can't only go top down, we have to go top down and bottom up. But the language is really revealing. You still have that hierarchy. So then people come along and they want to blow up the whole hierarchy and make it all horizontal. And that's like this radical cultural change that is immense. And if you just create that from scratch, sort of blueprint it into life, it fails, because that's an evolutionary change that needs to happen. However, as a model, I think we have to establish something where that simple thing, where people do what they like to do, happens more often.
Right.
And the model that I propose for that looks more like a garden. It's more like a circle, if you like, more like a flat structure, but it's a if you think of an organization as a garden, it's got a boundary. It's a definitive structure. It needs to have a vision of what it wants to be. That's probably the most important thing. And there needs to be a North Star, or I like to call it a beating heart. There needs to be a center that an organization has. That's fairly static. It doesn't have to be absolutely static because as the world changes, that could change as well.
Agreed.
But then you grow stuff in that garden. And I like to think of that as initiatives or, areas in the garden where stuff grows. And management to me means helping that growth. And also sometimes making a hard call of, digging up an area that where nothing's going to grow, saying, okay, that was a failed experiment. Nothing's going to grow here, or that's not going to grow here. And then management becomes a reconciliation process of what does the outside world think about that garden, about that organization, and how does that reflect into the central vision, the beating heart, the core of the organization. And the management means reconciling the outside world and the inside of the organization and enabling growth, enabling evolution. And if you want to get away from the pyramid and go towards a more garden-like concept, that takes time. And you don't have to break the whole organization apart. You could just start with a project that you run like that. And a simple start is, instead of telling people what to do, is asking them what they want to do.
Right.
And not everybody can answer that question. I think I don't know if it's a minority, but people are so not used to that,
right,
that don't necessarily get meaningful answers. And that's where leadership is really important, because leaders can have the ability to give direction, which is also dangerous, especially when you're German, where leadership can go all wrong, So how do you use that in a fruitful way? And I think a good start is to slowly bring people back. Children know what they want, right? They tell you. But then through school, they get disengaged. They sit down, listen, and then they don't know what they want anymore. So bringing that back, and I think people love to adopt other people's goals if they like them. But that's, again, a reconciliation process. And starting this on a project level, instead of asking, well, we talked to this research group or that big 5 consulting firm, and they think strategically we should go in that direction, and that's what we're going to do now. You could turn the whole game completely around and say, look, we've got challenges here. The world's changing. Where do you want to apply your skills and abilities, and which skills and abilities do you want to evolve in order to do something where you think we as a group can be successful?
Perfect.
That's a different approach.
Very different approach. And I'll punctuate that with a call for curiosity in leadership. So let me take just a second and sort of ground this in a play-by-play example of what that might look like in an organization. Let's go with, again, what is going to be a traditional top-down kind of organization. Leader at the top creates a vision, hires the managers, they manage the work being done by the technicians, and so on. And making an instantaneous flip to some kind of flat holacracy-based organization, while that might be a noble end game, that requires some soak time, right? Some transition time. And it can't happen immediately. So let's slow walk this with, say, one simple project. And we've got the broader vision. That's the beating heart, if you will, that North Star that's in the center of the donut on a Goalscape board. And then we have the ring just outside of that maybe identifies the main key objectives to getting where we're going. That might include, our marketing channels defined, our sales team motivated, our financials clear, our delivery mechanisms and distribution model is optimized. Okay, those are ring number 2 on the Goalscape board. Now, you could go to your marketing team and sort of enroll them in the process of deconstructing how we're going to achieve these goals, or even this one goal that maybe we've set for our marketing team. And leading with curiosity is what I would advocate in how we enroll our people in that. First, obviously, you have to create a safe environment where they feel like they could speak up, they can object, they can bring their ideas, and they're not going to be criticized or ostracized for them. So again, culture is going to be critical here, but these are the baby steps, I think, not only to building that culture, but proceeding down this project map where we enroll our team in the work to be done. And so you tell me if you agree or disagree. I'm happy to get into that. But if we present to our people, here's our one sub goal, maybe even a sub goal that we want for the next month. We want 10,000 visitors to our site and a click-through rate of 22% and a conversion rate of 3%. Let's just throw some generic kind of plan out there for a marketing team. For that leader to present to their people, how are we going to do that? And then elicit their ideas, their feedback, their responses. Now they have some agency in it. They have a voice in the conversation. And then doesn't stop there, because I would advocate then the leader has to say, now, why is that important? Right? Come back with more curiosity. Why is that important? Can we do it? Can we do it on time? Is that the most effective way? What are the dissenting voices in the room? And now you've got a proper team engaged, rather than that pyramidic kind of structure that you were talking about before, where somebody has delegated not only the vision, but the methodologies and the timelines and the compensation and everything all the way down the line. They've delegated that, and everybody just falls into line. We still need a leader to help guide this conversation, to still ask the compelling questions, to still invite dissent, to still inspire everybody. And I think the one of the core components to that is an inherent curiosity that is expressed to the team in the development of those goals and the plans and logistics for how we're going to get there. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree, but I think where the waters get muddied easily is, how do you get people to be curious? They are only curious if they want to get somewhere. If they don't really understand the goal or believe in the goal, then they're not going to be curious. So how do you get people to be motivated? I think it's important to get more clarity into a situation. Like, what is this business initiative for? Is it for the long term to evolve our opportunities to be better than our competitor? Or is it for the short term to keep our business healthy? And connecting the dots like that, where does the initiative feed into? Where does the project feed into? Why does that product matter? So going back to Steve Jobs, when he had the idea of getting 1,000 songs in your pocket,
right?
He wanted to turn Apple around. He knew Apple had a problem with their business model. Mm-hmm. So he has this wild idea, and then he thinks, can we do this? And basically, together with someone at the bottom of the org chart, again, not Steve Wozniak, but the developer of the iPod, he grinded away of making that product a reality. It's connecting the dots like that. You know, how is this initiative going to help us? What is it for? How is it going to make us a company that I don't want to leave until I retire? You know, is the leader capable? And then you get curiosity for free, and you get collaboration for free, because people get serious about achieving something because they know where it feeds into. And so structuring and aligning goals in a meaningful way and in a truthful way. Like, if there's no transparency where the break even is, just as an example, and what the profits are, and where the profits are going, and, you know, how they're reinvested, then people sort of sign off and they don't care anymore. And I think it's the art of connecting sort of hardcore goals with inspirational long-term goals that people may mostly do because it's fun, also because it's explorative. That's why the 20% time at Google, I think, was such a great success in the early days. And they created these awesome products that the whole world loves, and that we should be grateful for that they exist. Google Maps, I think, is one of those projects that came out of 20% time, where they said, just do what you like.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Right. 20% of your allocated work time is to whatever you feel like doing, whatever projects you feel like pursuing. They were given license and permission to go down those paths.
But maybe 20% time is not a good idea if you haven't broken even with your business in December. Then you're in life support mode. It's like, let's work really hard. We got to save this business model. And to be honest, everybody, probably this business model is going to run out, but we can save it for long enough to evolve a new vision of who we are. And there's an interesting twist in this. Instead of asking, where do we want to go and what people do we need? What skills do we need to develop? You can turn it around and say, this is the people we have. This is the situation we're in. What can we make of that? Hey, everybody, where do you think the future is? And then you have this open dialogue and everybody is curious. Hey, we're looking for the future. And then you're starting to look for new ways and everybody's really interested in it because it's their future, right? And that's, again, a different paradigm. Instead of throwing out a strategy is probably outdated the moment you start to implement it, you evolve it together with the people you have.
I love that approach. And one of the elements of it that we haven't really addressed is the spectrum of people that we have within an organization. We've got the ambitious minds and hearts of a certain percentage of the people in our organization who are innovators and early adopters and very ambitious, have these audacious ideas and visions and goals and very outspoken, all the way to the other side of the spectrum of widget makers. They are content being widget makers. They don't want to contribute to the vision. They're happy to come in and produce widgets on the assembly line. And that's absolutely fine for certain organizations. I think the world needs widget makers to some degree for the production of products. But I think we can even do better at, even on that far end of that spectrum, we can even do better at retaining and inspiring and creating joy for that level of people if we're meeting them where they're at by giving them some kind of vision into what that widget represents that they're creating on the assembly line, even at that level, because that, transparency as a concept, not to mention the actual embodiment of it, allows a leader to meet each individual member of the team where they're at, right? Because it taps into their inherent level of intrinsic motivation. And without that, you're trying to paint the picture of your culture with a single brush, and that just doesn't work.
I think the research is pretty clear that diversity is a winner. And I learned this sort of the hard way. The crew I sailed with in my first Olympics that I mentioned in the beginning, where I was so lucky to meet him, I didn't think I was so lucky when we were building up for the games. He really annoyed me, and I really badly annoyed him. And then I found out, and that's every leader needs to find that out eventually, that you don't want to work with your best buddies on a serious project. If you just have buddies all around and everything is so nice and you're having a good time, that's not necessarily the key to success. Because if you want to achieve a goal, what matters is, do you have the perspectives and the skills and the knowledge to achieve that goal? Right. And you need different people for that. And he was very different from me, very different approach he had. And I came to appreciate that difference only after realizing the reason we're successful is because we're different, not despite being different. And I think that's really important in any successful team, that you get an appreciation for the people that annoy you the most because they probably can give you the most.
Nothing of substance or longevity can be created without friction. Like, we can talk metaphysical about that, or we can talk just very basic logistically about that. Nothing substantial with any longevity, and certainly nothing inspired, can be born without friction. That's just a law of nature, much less organizational dynamics and our own humanity. Like the best relationships that you have. Think of the best relationships in your life. You don't just sit around and nod at each other in agreement every time you're in a conversation. You have a heated conversation, you have disagreements, you have differences. And being able to see those in an organization, which is, again, nothing but a bunch of individual relationships all coalesced under a unified purpose. Without that transparency, without that safety to express those ideas, share those ideas, be involved in the birthing of those ideas, without that, again, you've got these disenfranchised people who now it's only about the extrinsic motivation. It's about the paycheck. It's about the carrot and the stick. And their heart won't be in it. Their body may be there, but they won't.
Yeah, and that's an incredibly lame motivation. It does work. I mean, if it's existential,
temporarily,
if you need the paycheck, you're really after it and you're going to act after it. But it's also a recipe for burnout. And I mean, if we want to have a world of abundance and a world of innovation and a world of increasing happiness, and there's happiness gradients all over the world. Some countries are happier than others, so it's good to compare them. If we want to increase that, we need to get better at working together. And the climate, the current climate in Europe, the current climate in the US, the division of societies, the populism that's arising, the inability to talk to each other, that's all really scary. And businesses, I think, play an important role in doing this better. And there's good businesses that do that. It's very, very important that we evolve in the direction where we have more appreciation for the other side, for people who have a very different perspective, and not thinking that our perspective is right, but it may be a really interesting perspective onto a problem that helps us to go forward. And so could the other side have that. And, leadership means reconciliating these different perspectives. And a leader is wrong also. I mean, politicians are bashed really badly at the moment. They always were, kind of, but now it's really bad. And I always think, yeah, it's a tough job. You're supposed to be the one that's predicting the future and makes the right decision. It's really hard. I mean, obviously, if politicians are corrupt, they should be kicked out.
That's a different conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a sin. And so same with a leader. But a lot of people are trying really hard, and we need appreciation for good leadership. We need appreciation for the different perspectives onto a problem, and that makes better teams in sports and in business.
It does. The best idea wins in from a very pragmatic perspective, but it also, by airing all of the varying perspectives about an idea, we get a chance to make sure that the best idea is winning. Not just the person whose name is at the top of the org chart, but it's the best idea.
Yeah. Well, there is an intrinsic problem in the ways businesses are set up, because as we laud that we live in a democratic world, most companies are kingdoms, right? Mm-hmm. Still pyramidically shaped kingdoms. And that creates a certain reality. It takes a very good leader in that environment to create very high levels of motivation. That's why a lot of businesses are now experimenting. I mean, very large German companies are experimenting with new models that are more horizontal, more holocratic, and a lot of interesting experiments are happening at the moment. I think we're searching for new paradigms there. And I think that's important, and that's very valuable. And goal setting plays a core part in that. How do we arrive at the goals that we set out for? How flexible are we? And the agile movement that came from the world of software development, that was project oriented, I think we need to broaden that concept of agility to this evolution of strategy. I think long-term strategy was sort of a dreamland we were following. And by the way, in architecture as well, city planning, and we see that these huge city planning projects are usually problematic. And the large strategy initiatives in companies, people roll their eyes. And we need a more agile approach to that. And evolving goals I think is really the key with the people who are supposed to achieve those goals. So that's a really interesting field for the years to come. And we're trying to evolve Goalscape so that it supports the process of a more agile, strategic, and tactical approach to anything we do.
A more agile, strategic, and tactical approach. I love the way you put that. And I kind of call back to what we were just talking about a minute ago. It offers the opportunity for collaboration and personal investment as well. It's another element that I love about it. You're tapping into something, and this, woo-woo hyperbole aside, the point of this season of the Clearing Obstacles podcast is, and I truly mean this from my heart, we need to reimagine what good leadership looks like. From my estimation, there is very little in the world that can impact our humanity as much as business. Not only because of the products and services that they provide to the population of humanity, and particularly the underserved as well, but the way that we go about providing all of that, the way that we can feel that our participation in the process is vital, the way that we can feel seen and heard and appreciated and valued, all can be channeled through a business mechanism. And it's one of the many, many reasons that I love Goalscape, is because it offers the opportunity to provide all of that within an organization. I mean, what is the point of an organization? Whether it's a sports team, a company, there's a goal, there's an intended outcome for our efforts. And if that can't be articulated and understood by all of the stakeholders in that organization, your chances diminish significantly, and your longevity diminishes significantly. And I think through this, and if you're listening to this, you agree to some level, obviously, that it has to start with leadership and it has to be perpetuated through effective leadership. And we are. I think you're right. We're kind of evolving the paradigm of what that looks like. I think the pyramidal structure that you talked about is antiquated, and I think holacratic, completely flat organization can work, but in very rare, in its purest form, in very rare situations, it can. I've seen it, but there's a hybrid model that, like you said, is a little more agile, that we are still discovering as we're emerging into the century. I mean, we're 24 years into it now, and I think we're still trying to find our footing.
Yeah, I think the agility aspect means that, leadership can become a bit more situational. It doesn't have to, the org chart doesn't have to be so rigid. It's
right.
in a situation, some people should take over, that should step back in other situations. We should be a bit more relaxed about the roles. And of course, a lot of human aspects play into that. How secure are you? What's the safe space? How secure is your job if you don't fulfill the role of the leader in a traditional way anymore? There's very important economic questions. I think politics has a large part to play, because it can set very important rules that define how we do business. I'm a big fan of business as an engine of innovation, but I also believe that the society has to decide on the rules that you want to apply. Just to give you a good example, the way the rules were set in the past 60, maybe 150 years in business were that a company chucks out a product, rakes in the price for it, and that's the end of the story, right? Whatever happens with the product afterwards didn't matter to the company anymore. And it was good if it was good enough. The product was good enough to last long enough for people to be happy with the product, resell it. But then if it would die after 10 or 20 years, that was also really good, because then you need to buy new products.
Obsolescence, you bet.
Obsolescence was built in. Now, if you change the rule and say, okay, any product you put out in the market, you also have to take it back, or actually, you're not selling that product anymore, you're renting it out. That completely changes the game, because then you're building a product that has high maintainability, high recyclability, high quality, still needs to be very attractive product for people to rent, but it changes the game completely. The effective output, and the business doesn't set this rule themselves, that necessarily the society can set that rule. So there's a push and pull from both sides. I think politics and business need to work together, but having that ecosystem of innovation is super important, and it drives our world forward. And that's the reason why, the Western countries usually ahead, because they have more vibrant economies. but politics has also a really important role to play, and that's why I think we have to have higher involvement and higher appreciation. Also, what goals are what goals is the public sector setting, and how do they shape the society? Again, it's the same thing. I look at it as slightly different types of organizations with slightly different goals, but in the end, it's organization.
Yeah, agreed. And at that macro level for society, we're talking about politics. That's a mechanism for the social systems that are put in place is politics. Politics, I think, is the game that puts those leaders in place. And my eyes aren't on European newspapers right now, but they are on American newspapers. And confidence in our social leaders is at truly an all-time low. Historically speaking, it's never been worse. And just the lack of trust, the lack of transparency, the lack of inspiration, the lack of legitimate dialogue. I mean, if you want to talk about dysfunction in business leadership, you can blow that out to a macro level in our social structures. And the problem is not only more profound, but I think even more impactful, because like you said, that's the system that writes the rules for society and how we're expected to conduct ourselves. Leadership at every level, man. This is the topic that just lights me up.
It's a core topic for this century, and we can make it or break it. But I'm a radical optimist. I always have this little dinosaur here on my table, which is a Tyrannosaurus, and there's other dinosaurs who are further away from that animal than we are away from the Tyrannosaurus in terms of time, right?
Sure.
And that if you look at those millions of years, there's been so much climate change over that period, but they never knew about it. They just had to deal with it, right? And evolve, and species died and things evolved and catastrophes happened. We're the first species that can look into the future and say, oops, I think we're going to have a problem. Yeah. And we're dealing with it. And there's so much reason to be optimistic. I mean, the growth of renewable energy, the renewable energy sector, it's phenomenal. There's so much reason to be optimistic. We have the power to shape our future and to set the goals that will turn the world into a direction that is more healthy and more happy for our children. And when I'm traveling with them, I am thinking, what is this going to look like in 50 years? And I'm optimistic it's going to look a whole lot better. But it depends on what we do now and what goals we set and how inspired they are and how we find smarter and better ways to create a better world. It's all about goal setting.
I think that's so well spoken and probably a great way to even wrap this up, Marcus. That's why I am so inspired by your approach to leadership, your worldview, that radical optimism that you talked about, because you're exercising the multiple facets, forgive my mixed metaphor here, of a reimagined version of leadership that is both inspiring and fills our hearts with the motivation to do the good work, to make humanity better, to make our experiences more fulfilling and flourishing. And you're exercising the other side of that is logistical and tactical, and having a tool like Goalscape that allows us to bridge that divide, to find that hybrid and that ever improving and innovating model of what it looks like to be a good leader, to not only inspire the people that we are leading, but to also equip them with the tools that they need to succeed and help the organization succeed. It's why I'm so grateful for the product, and I just can't cheer it on enough.
Thank you so much, Dan. Well, that's what we're trying. It's constantly evolving. It won't ever be finished as a product.
Why it's so perfect, Marcus, I need to interject. That's why it's so perfect is you're practicing what you're preaching there, that there is an innovation, a spirit of innovation that is perpetually woven into the design and the spirit behind the product.
Thank you so much.
Man, thank you so much for your time and for this product that you've delivered to the world, for the stories that you have. I want to continue to have multiple conversations with you. They will probably not be ones that subject our listeners to because of the rabbit holes I'm sure we'll go down. But I'm really grateful to have come to know you and look forward to more conversations. What's currently cooking for you besides or in addition to Goalscape that would be worthy of telling our audience about?
Well, we're going to have a big release. We've been chewing on delivering a day mode for Goalscape. The Goalscape's always had a dark mode long before, application to use dark mode. I always thought it was better contrast on screen, especially when you meet with a team. But a lot of people like the lighter look in a business environment. So we're going to have day mode, and we're going to constantly evolve the feature set. We want to do more on mobile. It's largely a desktop application where you map out when you have a bit more space. We want to make this notion of now and next easier, where you have a simple way of toggle between, if you look at your set of goals, and it could be a lot in an organization, like 1,000 goals, you then assign responsibilities to each goal. But what are you doing now? You only want to tag as a person 2, maximum 3 goals as that's on your agenda now, because if you've got more, you lose focus.
Everything else is a distraction. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but then you want to have a next list of things that you're probably going to do next. And there I love the technique by Oliver Bergman, where he says, if you get up, if you start your work, or if you get up in the morning, ask yourselves, where can you have an impact today? And out of your next goals, which is the one where you can have a real impact, which is very urgent maybe, but where do you think you feel like you can move the needle? Because if you
leverage,
can't move the needle, you're just wasting your time, right? So that's a creative way of dealing with a next list. And we want to make that a little easier. You can do it now with tags. You just simply tag things as that's next, that's next, that's next. And then we have a focus panel where you click and you can show your next list. But we want to make it even easier, where you can toggle it, where you can see it on your mobile. So that is something that we're working on. And now it's time to go out and talk to people about it, because we haven't done that a whole lot, because it was always a side project of my other activities. We haven't really done much marketing. And I think it's wonderful that we live in times where you can have more long form conversations about things like these, because they're not always that simple. So it's a pleasure to talk to you, who is so interested in these kind of things. And we want to do more of that.
It's one of the many reasons I appreciate you and your company and your vision and the leadership in your product. And you pay attention to the nuance. I said earlier, and it's a hill I'll die on, nothing significant or with any longevity will be created without friction. I think that also applies to nuance, right? Nuance is required for anything of significance, certainly of elegance. Leadership requires nuance. You can't have these conversations in 140 characters or less, or in a 30-second social media reel. It's just impossible. And so I'm grateful for the way you guys are making sure you weave in that nuance and where it's coming from, even just the now and the next, and making that simpler to be able to access. Yeah, it's already there. I am very eager for the mobile. If that sounds like that's on your roadmap, which I'm very excited for. Most leaders are connected to their mobile device as much as they are their desktop, or even more so. So I'm definitely eager for that. It's good to hear that's on your roadmap as well.
Yeah, we see very good conversion rates from visits to trial to purchase. And that's without the mobile app. So we really want to invest in the mobile app. That's going to change the game for us. It will remain to be a mapping solution. So sometimes you want the larger screen, and especially with a team, you want to gather around that.
Agreed.
But there's other cool things to evolve. One of our customers uses a confidence value for every goal. And that's a really cool feature and a really elegant way of asking yourself, is that a worthwhile goal? Because if the confidence to achieve a goal drops, it's a very good assessment of what's happening. And then all of a sudden, if you talk about that, well, my confidence dropped, you create an environment where people can admit that their confidence has dropped to achieve that goal.
Right.
You can also open the door to other people saying, I think I can help you with that. Or people say, I think we should call this off for now, at least, because it's going to be too hard to achieve that. And we maybe want to support that with a feature where you can simply mark your confidence from 0 to 10 or so in some other elegant way for every goal. There's so much interesting ideas floating around. Mostly we like to do this with our customers who then use it day in and day out.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we appreciate the openness to our feedback, and it sounds like it's bringing about some terrific iterations of what's next for Goalscape. Again, more information on that will be in the show notes. Marcus, thank you again for your time. It's been such a terrific pleasure. Hope to talk to you again really soon.
Likewise. Thank you, Dan.
We at Best Self Coaching hope you got all that you came here for from today's episode. And if you want more like this, be sure to follow and subscribe to Clearing Obstacles on your favorite listening platform. You can also go to bestself.coach/podcast for more information. There you'll find more episodes and links to the content discussed today, as well as info on how you can get in touch if you're interested in clearing your own obstacles to become the kind of leader that you know your team is waiting for. Your business should serve your life, so let us help you get there from here, because nobody should do this on their own. Thanks again for listening. See you soon.